You saw that, right? Who's there?
We are talking My Best Friend's Exorcism, and this one is directed by Damon Thomas. It's actually adapted from a novel, although I haven't actually read that novel. I understand it is actually somewhat of a departure from the source material, so, you know, bear that in mind. So, this actually kind of plays a little bit like Stranger Things, because it's going to have this 80s vibe to it, with a kind of a Mean Girls aesthetic to it, and with the kind of dealing with the possession. So, the story takes place in the 80s, as I say, and focuses on these two teenage girls who are kind of best friends, and they decide they're going to go out one night with a couple of the other girls and, you know, have a kind of a girly night. However, they stumble across this apparent haunted house, which is kind of out in the middle of the woods. And in there seems to be some type of spirit which actually possesses one of the girls. And as the film, you know, goes on, she sort of slowly starts acting a little weird, trying to kind of push away those people closest to her and actually kind of, you know, give them harm. And it's only this kind of like this best friend that really sort of seems to be the one that really is looking out for her. The parents seem to just be kind of like concerned that maybe she's doing drugs and stuff like this. The other friends kind of seem too caught up in their own lives. The kind of the teachers and the kind of the nun in this kind of like Catholic school don't seem too interested. So it's up to this kind of best friend to try and let's just say dissuade this demon from continuing to possess her friend. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in this movie. Now this is an 80s kind of set movie. Obviously I think coming off the back of Stranger Things and trying to kind of capture that kind of like pop culture zeitgeist that Stranger Things have obviously kind of gave us. So there is some kind of quite fun 80s kind of music and things here, fashion choices, hair. I think aesthetically, you know, they don't do a bad job of kind of recapturing the 80s, very much kind of like a Stranger Thing kind of look to it. But put a pin in that, because I am going to come back to that. So yeah, it has this kind of 80s feel to it, at least visually. And I've got to say, I think the idea here of having a tween kind of like a possession movie that's kind of not particularly scary or graphic, but kind of like, you know, horrific enough that I think it will give younger people a little bit of a scare. You know, it's filling a space in the market that I feel is somewhat kind of underserved. I mean, we've all kind of, you know, in this channel we're going to do a lot of horror films, but everyone kind of has to start somewhere, and it's easy to kind of write a film like this off because it's kind of, it aims for a kind of a younger audience. But you know, like I've said, we all kind of started somewhere. I think this is probably a reasonable kind of entry level kind of horror film for those kind of younger kind of audience members. Although it doesn't necessarily play like a kids film. You know, it does have some more adult themes in it. You know, we have like this possessed girl trying to convince one of her friends to kind of diet to the point where it's kind of killing her. Another one of her friends that she kind of exposes for being gay. So there is some kind of like some adult themes there. It just kind of has this kind of tween kind of like young teenage kind of feel to it. So if you're a fan of like high school kind of dramas and things like that, and I've mentioned kind of Mean Girls, there is that kind of like that element to it. So I do think, although it's obviously not going to be for everyone, I appreciate that. I think this has got a relatively kind of good idea about who it's trying to aim this movie for, and I actually think it might capture that kind of in a reasonably well. The demonic stuff, it plays a little differently from some other kind of possession movies. It's kind of a comedic film. Certainly as the film progresses, there are, you know, it's mixed with kind of more mature elements, but also some comedic moments as well. Rather than kind of getting a priest to help with the exorcism, there's this kind of three brothers that are sort of like shopping mall style kind of evangelists, and who do a mix of exercise and preaching. And they kind of wrote one of them into helping, and he's kind of really just played for laughs, to be honest. I'm not quite sure if the comedy necessarily landed, but you know, I think it was again not exactly what we've seen in you know, in other particular possession films. I think the effects here are interesting. We kind of do see a kind of a full-on kind of demon, and it's kind of played a little differently, I think, from other possession movies. It's less scary, more kind of like fugly. It's the best way I would describe it. So yeah, it's kind of, it does have a little bit of originality to it, to a degree. Like I've said, it is based on a novel, but I understand obviously it is a little different to that, so I couldn't tell you, what the differences are. But I think it does have a few kind of like elements that you feel is a little fresh, maybe not completely original, but certainly kind of fresh feeling. I did get the kind of the chemistry between our kind of two female leads, that there is a you know, a kind of a genuine friendship between the two of them. So I thought the performances and the kind of the character work here was all pretty good. I appreciate the fact that we kind of steer clear from a kind of forced-in kind of love story that we have with kind of like, you know, boys and things like that. It kind of distracts from, I think, the main story. And it kind of feels, you know, typical in these kind of films. So I'm glad it kind of, it focused more on a kind of a friendship more than anything else, which is kind of quite refreshing to a certain degree. And you know, it's quite kind of fun and kind of a bright kind of movie in a lot of ways, thanks largely to its 80s aesthetic. However, let's transition to what doesn't work, and let's stick with that 80s aesthetic, because although I feel this movie, visually speaking, I think does capture the 80s kind of feel reasonably well, where it doesn't is the kind of the attitudes and the language of our characters, because they do seem a lot more contemporary in the way they speak together, and there's an attempt here to kind of like, you know, fold into kind of more recent kind of social issues, which I think was a mistake, because it does feel like pandering, to be honest with you. Although it's aesthetically, I think, quite kind of relatable to an 80s kind of style you know, scenario, it doesn't really feel like it when you look at the way these characters are depicted and some of the kind of the dialogue that they are saying. It feels a lot more kind of contemporary. I also think the movie undercuts some of like the genuine kind of like scary scenes with kind of like comedy moments, and I do think as well the script, you know, if you're a kind of a purist, you kind of like, you know, demonic lore and exorcism, possession films, how this kind of goes around kind of getting at this exorcism. No spoilers, it's in the title. I don't know if it would really kind of fly with people who take this a little bit more kind of seriously, because it ultimately, I won't say what happens exactly, but I feel like the actual exorcism, it just kind of what the story wanted to do, rather than a typical kind of, or, you know, what has been documented as the traditional route to do an exorcism, is kind of thrown out the window a little bit. The actual kind of Lemon Brothers, which are these kind of bodybuilding kind of evangelists, I felt were unnecessary and actually had a little bit more screen time than I think they actually deserved. In actual fact, one of them really kind of hangs around far longer than I think that the film really warrants, to be honest with you, and he's played purely for laughs, and I don't think the jokes certainly don't land with his kind of character. I think that is one of the elements where the comedy really does kind of fall flat. And the kind of the demon side of stuff goes largely kind of unexplored about, you know, what was actually kind of the cause of this, and what, you know, this kind of haunted house, what is the backstory. Don't know anything about that, so it's kind of just kind of skipped over. I suppose, you know, necessarily to answer everything, but it just seems like, oh, it's just there, you know, it's just kind of there, we've got to accept it. So onwards and upwards, I suppose. Ultimately, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a odd film in regards to tone, I suppose, because it does have this kind of young feel to it, this young teenage tween feel, but it does have elements that are more mature. At the same time, it undercuts some of the kind of the scary elements in favour of goofy kind of humour, which I don't always think lands. So this movie is a little bit of a, you know, an odd one in regard to the possession movies, because I just feel it kind of doesn't really fit in any particular kind of box necessarily, which might not necessarily be a bad thing, but I don't really think it will be kind of please fans of any particular kind of genre necessarily, and it's a weird amalgamation of many. But it is an interesting film in that respect at the same time. And I did kind of quite like our two kind of central performances. I thought they actually, they seem kind of quite genuine, and they do spend a lot of time kind of building up this kind of friendship, which I appreciate. I thought that was done pretty well. But ultimately, I think it's relatively average overall, so I will give this one a 5 out of 10. I don't think it's necessarily a bad film in any way, but yeah, I don't think it's necessarily one that possession movie fans will be clamouring to see, because as I say, it takes too many liberties, I think, with established lore. So it's a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.